Mondays provide a little challenge in Italy as most of the museums are closed. So this day I provide you a free day and suggest 3 very convenient possibilities that are all quite near our next destination, Florence. On your free day, I recommend either Pisa, Sienna, or Venice. The city of Pisa is not particularly interesting, however the famous Leaning Tower is quite worth your time. It recently was cleaned and its leaning tendencies tamed so that it will not eventually tumble over. It is also good to notice that here you have a set of 3 buildings, a cathedral, a tower, and a baptistry. You'll notice this same set in Florence as well as other Italian cities. Sienna is the easiest destination as it is just a short ride from Florence on the bus. Its cathedral and large open square are the main attractions here. You'll notice the cathedral is ornamented with alternating black and white stones. Not surprisingly, these are the colors of Sienna's coat of arms. During the Renaissance, there was a fierce competition between Sienna and Florence for power in the region, and though Sienna was originally stronger, Florence gradually won out. On the floor of the cathedral in Sienna, you'll see a mosaic of Hermes Trismegistus. Though his writings actually only date back to the 3rd century AD, many writers during the Renaissance thought that he was a contemporary of Moses and went to his writings as a source of much supposed ancient wisdom. Dante himself actually references Hermes as an ancient authority. The cathedral also houses a fine collection of medieval choral books. Rather than printing each member of the choir with music of his own as we do today, these very large books were simply placed on a high stand where everyone could read off the same book at the same time. The illuminations in these books show the care for detail and beauty of the time. While in Sienna, take time to wander about the lovely shopping town, and perhaps you too might name your minivan or first child after her. Venice is a bit farther to go. However, the high-speed train will get you there rather quickly, and you'll be well rewarded with an opportunity to see a completely different way of life. The story of Venice is a long and interesting one. The founding of Venice actually goes back to Romans fleeing the barbarians after the fall of Rome. The Romans sought refuge from the barbarians in the marshes and lagoons of this area. The barbarians were not interested in the land as it did not appear to be habitable. However, the Romans came up with a very ingenious way of establishing buildings in this muddy area. What they did is they actually took very large trees and pounded them down into the mud until they were entirely covered over by the mud. Well, then they would take large stones and place them down into the mud on top of those pylons. The curious thing about this technique is that because this wood would then become entirely covered with mud, it was kept free from any oxygen, and thus the wood did not decay. And so these ancient pylons that the buildings are built on oftentimes go back to the Romans themselves. Now, oftentimes we think of the Roman Empire falling in 476. However, you have to remember this is only part of the story. The Eastern Empire in Constantinople went on until 1453 when it fell before the Ottoman Turks. And yet Venice too continued on. Venice grew in strength throughout the Middle Ages. It became a mighty trading empire. And at its height, Venice was building a ship a day in the narrow strip of water called the Arsenale near St. Mark's Square. In 1204, Venice attacked and significantly weakened the city of Constantinople. After this attack, they brought back the horses of St. Mark's. They were originally Roman in the 3rd century, were taken to Constantinople, and then finally ended up here at St. Mark's. Venice continued as a strong republic until finally it was conquered by Napoleon himself in 1797. So if you want to think of the last vestiges of the Roman Empire falling in 1797 before Napoleon, I don't think you'd be far from the mark. A tour of the Doge's palace is quite interesting, and it was built in various stages between 800 and 1500. I was particularly impressed with the longevity of the Venetian Republic, and though its doges had a reputation for being ruthless in their dealings, Venice had a long history of relatively stable republican government. Also on St. Mark's is the Campanile. This 323-foot tall bell tower was initially constructed around 900 AD and stood until its collapse in 1902, killing only the caretaker's cat. The structure we have today was rebuilt as an exact copy and completed in 1912. St. Mark's Basilica was built around 1000 and has a fascinating front. The columns that decorate the front are of many different types of marble, as most were captured from various cities around the Mediterranean that Venice conquered as its empire grew. The style of the basilica also shows distinct Eastern influence. Its style is much more like the Greek churches in the East surrounding Constantinople rather than those of Rome. The interior is also very Eastern and covered with many very ornate mosaics. The musical prodigy of Venice was Vivaldi. If you love his highly energetic music, there are plenty of opportunities to hear his compositions played in the various churches around the city. Venice is a different world. Living with water as your streets is quite enchanting. The tourists keep coming, but the locals have been leaving for a long time, and the survival of the city is in doubt, as major expenses must be met to ensure the survival of this gradually sinking city.